This is the Rental Rookie Podcast, Show 4.
Welcome to the Rental Rookie Podcast. Get inspired and get perspective from realtors, lenders, contractors, and other investors just like you. Now your host, Emily Duplessis.
Hey everybody! Welcome back to show number 4 of the Rental Rookie Podcast. This is your host, Emily Duplessis, and I'm super excited to be here with all of you today. We've got a great show planned with a great guest who's going to share a lot about the field of investing in real estate and buy and holds, and specifically how it's related to the law and why it's important as a real estate investor to understand the law when it comes to owning and investing these rental properties. On today's show, we have a guest by the name of Brian Davis. Brian Davis is actually the vice president of the website EZLandlord Forms. I don't know if you've ever been there before, but it's a great site. It offers a ton of information and free things as well as paid things that you can buy from the site. But it really is just a great resource for landlords. You can go on there. You can get a lot of stuff related to the laws and landlord-tenant laws. You can get leases. You can get applications. You can learn more about tenant screening. They've got a great forum. They have articles. They've got property analyzers. I mean, they've got, you name it, they've got it when it comes to investing in rental properties and, tons of resources for landlords. So I'm excited that Brian agreed to come on the show today. He not only is the vice president of EZLandlord Forms and really is working day to day in managing what's happening on that website, but he also is a real estate investor as well. So you're going to see today on the show, we're going to talk a lot about, his own experiences in investing in rental property. So yes, he has, the expertise of working in the field and working with other people who are related to the field of real estate investing and specifically buy and hold properties. But he also has his own experiences, both good and bad, and he's going to share those with us today. And it's a lot of great things that Brian has to share with us. So, one thing I want to mention is that if you haven't been to EZLandlord Forms, I recommend you check out the website. I have a link to it in the show notes. Because Brian is a guest on the podcast today, he is offering a deal for rental rookie listeners and subscribers to get an extra 15% off on anything that you wish to purchase from the website. Like I said, there are lots of things that you can get for free, but there's also some great resources that you can buy. So check out the show notes. There's a link there for you to be able to go to the website. And like I said, if you are interested in purchasing something, you'll get an extra 15% off just for listening and following Rental Rookie. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get Brian on the show. All right, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks for having me.
Today we're talking to Brian Davis from EZLandlord Forms, and he's going to share with us a lot about his own investing experiences and then what all he knows about in relation to and the things that are offered on EZLandlord Forms. So I want to start off just asking you about something that I feel like is not all that important or not all that talked about out there in this niche, and that's the whole idea of the local and state laws. How important are those when it comes to investing in rental property?
It's critically important at every step of the leasing cycle. Starting with even the way that you advertise a vacant rental unit, it's a lot harder to comply with laws than a lot of people think. For example, if you have a tiny studio apartment that's really only appropriate for a single person, you still can't say perfect for a single person in the rental listing. And when you go to sign the lease, you need to know things like, what are the restrictions on security deposits in my state? What are the restrictions on late fees? What forms do I need to serve on the tenant when they fail to pay the rent? Mm-hmm. Or what forms do I need to serve on the tenant when they violate the lease in a different way, because those forms are different than the non-payment of rent forms. Right. You need to know how long you have to wait before filing for eviction. You need to know how long the eviction process takes in your state. There's so much to know. But it's critical knowledge to have if you're going to make any money owning rental properties.
Right, and doing it the right way. I mean, the last thing that you want to do is get in this business and start to do things and buy property and start, making listings and signing leases, and then to find out that you're breaking a ton of laws in the process.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and people can get into a lot of trouble, not just in losing money on their properties, but they can also be sued. The tenants can sometimes stay in the property for months or years on end without having to pay the rent if you are not adhering to the laws. So, I mean, you can really lose a lot of money if you do not know your state's laws.
Yeah, and I have to wonder then, is it, for you to get caught, let's say, as a landlord, then would it be the tenants that are going and kind of, in a way, I guess, turning you in? Or how exactly, I guess, do you end up getting caught not following some of these laws?
Well, there are a lot of ways you can get caught. Probably the simplest way is when you go to file for an eviction on a wayward tenant, you still have to go to court. There's a hearing, in no matter what your state is, you have to go to a hearing and you go before the judge and explain your case. And the tenant has a chance to appear and explain their side of the story. And if you have, let's say, a lease agreement that's illegal in your state, or if you're trying to charge fees that are illegal, or any number of other ways that you have broken that state's laws, the judge can throw out your case. They can require you to jump through certain hoops before you can continue. Or, I mean, they can even set penalties against you in favor of the tenant. Of course, the tenant could also sue you in small claims court. They can call the local news media and have them write a story about how you're this terrible slumlord. And I've seen that happen. It happened to my old boss.
You're kidding.
My first job out of college, I had to, I was managing properties for him, and that happened. The local news got called on him.
Wow.
And he was not happy, I can assure you.
I'm sure, and I'm sure that he wasn't happy, because I'm sure people didn't want to rent from him after that.
Yeah, it just drags your name through the mud, and he was a somewhat public figure.
Right.
He owned a national lending company, a mortgage company. Yeah, so I mean, it was bad.
So he was kind of a big deal. I mean,
Well, so anyway, the point is, make sure you know your laws, because I mean, there are a lot of bad things that can happen to you if you don't.
Right. And I think it's funny that one of the things that you said earlier about even just putting on the listing with the studio rental that you were talking about, and even just putting on there like perfect for single person. Like, I often think like people probably wouldn't think twice about putting that on a listing or see how that could be bad or discriminatory or anything. I mean, that just in nature, it doesn't sound very bad. But here, just like you said, that could end up coming back and
Yeah, I mean, anti-discrimination laws, people think that they're a no-brainer, but they're really not. They're more complex than people think. Like, you can't, for example, advertise just in a religious circular, for example, because that's discrimination based on religion. And with the example before of saying it's perfect for a single person, that's discrimination based on familial status. So, it's just, there's a lot of these nuances to the laws that I think a lot of people fail to recognize.
Right. Well, and I think, too, one of the great things about the EZLandlord Forms site is if you go on there, you can find a lot of those state-specific laws so people can learn about them. Absolutely.
I mean, we have summaries of each state's laws in question and answer format, which is kind of an easy reference. But we take it a step further, and we also have state assist information, is what we call it. And that's where we'll guide you through the specific laws that you need for that form that you're making. So, for example, when you go to create a lease, when you go to enter the late fee amount, we'll actually tell you right next to it, these are the restrictions in your state.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
Well, I mean, it's information that people need to know, and it's part of having a state-specific lease. In fact, most of having a state-specific lease is not just the clauses in the document itself, but what you've entered into it. The amount of the security deposit, the amount of the fees that you're charging. Can you require that the tenant get renter's insurance? That sort of thing. So, I mean, part of our mission is to educate people on their state's laws, not just to sell them something. But they really need to know these things if they're even going to use our product properly.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of the greatest things, because I know I've been on and used some of the forms and things that are on the website, and they've been so beneficial. And I really feel like they're easy to navigate as somebody. I mean, even still for us, we're still fairly early in our investing careers, and being able to learn about all of this stuff. I mean, and I kind of now feel bad that we started this interview and this chat all talking about the laws, because I'm sitting here thinking to myself, man, if I was listening to this, I might be running in the other direction from investing in rental property, because we were saying all of these things that can happen, but they're really truly so important, because if you don't know those things, I mean, there are pretty dire consequences.
Yeah, well, we were talking a few minutes ago about how there's a certain amount of knowledge and work that goes into investing in rental properties. But the flip side of that is that you can get a much better return on rental property investing than you can in bonds or even in the stock market. I mean, you really can do a lot better if you're willing to put in that extra work with these rental properties.
Absolutely. I totally agree. That's one of the main reasons why we decided to go down this road as well. Just the return is great, and in terms of diversifying, our portfolio and, assets and things like that. I mean, it's a great way to go about it.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So we were talking a little bit about leases and things like that. I wanted to chat for a minute about rental applications. What do you think, and as a landlord yourself, what are some of the main things that should be included in a rental application?
Well, there's a lot that should be included there, but some of the most important things are who is living there, first of all. Not just the actual tenant who's going to be signing on the dotted line of the lease, but who else is going to be living there? For example, children or other adults that maybe aren't signing the lease. I mean, you could have a tenant who's a saint, but maybe his brother who's a sex offender is also going to be coming and staying there. So you need to know who all of the occupants are. And that goes for pets too. I'll give you a brief example. In Maryland, in my state, there's actually laws specifically against pit bulls. So if a tenant has a pit bull and it attacks somebody, the landlord is held liable. So you need to know who all of the occupants are going to be in the property, including pets. And second, you want to look into the applicant's housing history. You don't want someone who's moved every year for the last 5 years, because you're just going to end up with a turnover again in 11 or 12 months from now. So you really want someone with a stable housing history, someone who's been at the same place for a long time. You also need to get into all the obvious stuff too, like how much money do they make? How stable is their income from month to month? How stable is their employment history? How long have they been on the job? I mean, all of these questions are critically important. And not just collecting the information in a rental application, but you also need to call and actually verify that it's true. You need to call their supervisor and verify how much they make and how long they've been there, and what their chances of continued employment are.
Yeah. So I couldn't agree more with that, because actually I guess it was probably back in the spring, maybe we were going through the changing of the tenants, and we had shown one of our properties, and we had a guy come in, and he was all about, like, he had his checkbook out, and he was ready right then to, like, give us a check for a security deposit and everything. And we were kind of like, we'll fill out the application. We have to screen, Come to find out, when we called the employer was straight up with us and was like, honestly, I'm going to fire him in a week. And I was like, okay, thank goodness that we called. He was like, please don't say anything to him, and don't let him know that I'm planning on this, but I just wanted to be real with you and honest with you. Like, we don't get along and this and that. And he straight up told us. And I'm like, had we just taken that check when we were showing him the property, because it's easy, it's done, we don't have to worry about it, that could have caused major headaches in the future.
Yeah, those are conversations that you're always glad you had.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, we definitely were like, ooh, glad we made that call. But on that note, I mean, walk me through kind of a solid tenant screening process, okay? So you have your application, you look at it, you verify, you call some of the places. Is there anything else that you think is important that takes place in that screening process?
Sure. Beyond just calling the applicant's employer and verifying their income and employment, you should also call their current landlord to ask what kind of tenant they've been. Now, that data is a little bit, you have to take it with a grain of salt, because the best way to get rid of a bad tenant is to, make sure that they have a new place to move to.
Yeah, exactly.
But what doesn't lie is their credit history and their criminal history. You need to look at a full credit report, and not just look at the FICO score either. You need to look at their payment history, what kind of bills they pay on time every month, what kind of bills they maybe don't pay on time every month. You need to look at their public records on their history, like bankruptcies, judgments, liens. I mean, those are all huge red flags. There's an old saying in the lending industry that someone's income will tell you can they pay, and someone's credit history will tell you will they pay.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah, and criminal reports are just as important. I mean, even if someone has perfect credit and they will pay the rent on time every month, you still have to evict them if they're cooking meth in the basement. You know?
Right, exactly.
And you do have a certain responsibility to the neighbors and maybe your other tenants in the building or whoever. You don't want to have dangerous people living in the property.
Right. Yeah, I think it's all about kind of setting your own personal guidelines too. I mean, I think when you get into this whole field of investing in real estate and specifically in rental properties, I really think it's important to sit down at the beginning and kind of have goals. And in a way, I mean, depending on which avenue you're going, set some standards for kind of where your line is. And I think that comes into play too about, whether or not you'll pass on a tenant maybe that doesn't meet some of your standards, even though maybe it'll be another week or two before you get an application in. I think that's really important early on to do.
Oh, it's critically important, and those standards do vary from property to property. Mm-hmm. You're going to hold someone to a different standard if they're trying to move into a place with $600 rent versus $3,000 rent.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you do still need to have those set standards in mind for that specific property in that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And there's, you can do some things to give it a little bit of leeway. For example, if the applicant's credit isn't perfect, maybe they have a co-signer who's willing to sign on their behalf as well. Or you can do things like collect the rent automatically from their paycheck every 2 weeks as they get paid. So there is a little leeway, but in general, you're absolutely right. You need to have a set of standards, and you need to stick with them, even if you're feeling anxious about getting the ball rolling and getting it rented out. You still need to stick with those standards.
Yeah, I that's definitely something that we've learned. Well, you talked about having like a payment system where it's automatically withdrawing money. Now let's talk a little bit about property management. And again, in your own investing, I mean, what do you think about property management? I feel like a lot of times, like newbie investors or rookie investors, they get started and they want to keep as much cash in their pocket as possible. And that's obviously an expense to have property management take care of it. So, I mean, what are the benefits, the drawbacks of using property management or starting with it versus waiting for it? I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, it's a broad subject, but the first thing I would say is I think that newbie investors could stand the education of managing their first couple properties themselves. You learn a lot when you manage your own rental property or properties. And so learning some of those state laws we were talking about earlier, mm-hmm. Learning things about those standards we were just talking about a minute ago, about what kind of tenants to rent to. That's all part of that investment in knowledge that people need if they're going to be a good real estate investor. So I do encourage people to manage their first few properties themselves. Now, that being said, there does come a point where a lot of people don't want to do it anymore, either because they don't have the time or maybe they would just rather be out hiking on their Saturday instead of showing a rental property.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And,
nope.
and that you can make your properties into purely passive income. If you're willing to pay the fee, of course.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, it just comes down to your priorities. But I do recommend that people manage their first few properties themselves, at least for the first couple of years, to really get that education.
Yeah, I agree. I think that education is invaluable. I mean, you learn so much and because everything is so, I feel like when you start, you don't know what to expect with anything. And so you learn how to be flexible and you learn how to adapt. And I think, like you said, that's really important. If this is something that you're planning on really pursuing and really kind of going on in the future. I mean, if it's something where you're just kind of dabbling and maybe not sure if you're going to stick with it, okay. But if you're serious about making this a future for yourself, I think, yeah, I totally agree with you. It's definitely something that people should start off with.
Yeah, totally true. And people are going to do a lot better on their subsequent real estate investments after they've been through the ringer a little bit with their first property or two. I mean, they'll make much better investments on their third, fourth, fifth rental properties if they've gone through the trials and tribulations of managing that first property or two on their own.
Right. Absolutely. Learn lots of lessons and hopefully not repeat them, right? Later down the road.
That's right.
Oh, that's funny. Well, what about in terms of bookkeeping? I mean, what are any kind of tips that you have on how landlords can be effective and more productive in kind of keeping their books? Or, I mean, what are some of the things that newbie investors, what are some of the things they should be keeping? I mean, should they just have a file folder in a closet or in a desk somewhere that they're just throwing stuff in? Or how important is kind of keeping documentation of everything that you're doing?
Well, it's very important. And of course, it's no fun. Right, it takes time and it's a pain. But it'll cost you if you don't do it. Obviously, you need to keep copies of all expenses that you have. If you're ever audited, you're going to need to produce that stuff because it's all tax deductible. Mm-hmm. So presumably, people are writing these off on their tax returns. And you also need to keep a rent ledger with all the income that comes in. Now, even if you don't feel that you can do this adequately yourself, you can, of course, hire a property manager, as we were just saying, mm-hmm. Or you can hire a bookkeeper. You can even hire a part-time assistant who maybe works a couple hours a week and who does some of this drudgery work for you. But you should be keeping both electronic records of these things, and you should be keeping that physical file folder in the closet, because things can go wrong with your paper records, and you can have a fire or anything, and things go wrong with your electronic records. You can lose your hard drive, or anything can go wrong, as we've all had experience. So you need to have both electronic and paper records, and you need to make sure you're doing or keeping good records, even if it's not you that's keeping them, even if you pay someone else to do this for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and some of those records include like copies of leases, right? And deposit receipts, but like you said, the rent ledger. I mean, any kind of updates that you do or service calls that you make. I mean, I could probably go on, but there's quite a few things that you should really truly keep record of.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, some of my file folders for properties are several inches thick.
Right.
I mean, everything, tax bills, water bills. I mean, as you mentioned, records of phone calls with tenants. Nice thing about email is that you have a paper trail built in there. Mm-hmm. But, you should be keeping bank records, and ideally have a bank account for each LLC, and hopefully have no more than a couple properties per LLC. So
right. Well, I'm actually glad that you brought that up. So can you talk a little bit about the whole LLC and whether or not people, because I hear a lot of different viewpoints out there on whether putting properties in LLCs, should you, shouldn't you, does it really offer protection? I mean, I'm glad that you brought that up. What can you say about that?
Well, the first thing that I would say is talk to an attorney.
Right. I was going to say, I know you're not an attorney, but presumably, I'm sure whether or not you use LLCs or I know that you have been around this business now. I don't know.
I do think people should use LLCs. They're not expensive. Mm-hmm. You can file the paperwork yourself for $100,
right?
Or whatever it is in your state, but it's never much. There's no need to pay an attorney to draft the LLC paperwork, but you should talk to an asset protection attorney about building layers in between you as an individual and your individual assets and your real estate assets. And there are all kinds of things that people do. You can set up foreign corporations in other states and put the LLCs in those. And there's a lot of things that people do to get fancy about their asset protection. One easy and inexpensive thing you can do is just borrow a lot of money against the property because no one can take it if you have a big mortgage against it. But asset protection, it gets complicated quickly, and that does vary state to state as well. So, but I do recommend LLCs because they are cheap. So it's an easy first layer of protection that you can put in between your private assets and your real estate investments.
Right. And I think that's important too, because you just have to think about, you just never know. That when it comes down to it, you just never know what could happen in the future, the type of tenants that you're going to have, an injury at a property that you're held liable for. You just don't know the future. And so, like you said, kind of starting to put those layers in between your personal and individual assets and that can save a lot of headaches in the future.
Yeah, landlords get sued all the time. I've been sued before, actually not by a tenant, but by the neighbor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but these things happen.
Right. Yeah.
So, in that particular case, the neighbor was saying that my contractor had ripped off part of their roof, which of course he hadn't, but they were struggling financially and they were looking for an easy an easy windfall. And so yeah, you have to be as careful and meticulous as you possibly can to protect yourself against lawsuits.
Right. Yeah, because you just never know. I mean, look at that example. Who would have thought that the neighbor would have been finding a way to come after you?
Yeah, and we were talking earlier in the call about pit bulls and pets and people getting attacked by your tenants' pets and you being held responsible and liable. Mm-hmm. So you just never know what will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's good advice, and I know I appreciate that because my husband and I are kind of in a place now where we're deciding what we want to do and where we want to put our properties, and so that was a little self-serving for myself as well as for the audience as well. So thank you. Well, let's talk a little bit about. I want to talk more about EZLandlord Forms.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you had to say, what are maybe two of the most underutilized but important forms on the site, what would they be?
Well, the forms, we have hundreds and hundreds of forms, and some of them are for very specific situations. For example, we have eviction forms for every state, and some of those and there's probably 3 to 6 different eviction forms per state. Some of them being, if this is the 3rd violation within a 12-month period and it's a non-payment of rent violation, then you use this particular form. So, some of them are specific. There are resources on the site that I think are very underutilized and that people probably don't know about. One thing that we just launched recently was a rental property ROI calculator that's really just awesome. It's integrated with Zillow, so you enter a couple details about a property that you're thinking about investing in, and it will give you data from what the annual yield projection will be and what the monthly cash flow projection will be, what the neighborhood demographics are, what the neighborhood values are, how they're trending. It's really cool. It'll give you your local tax information and mortgage payment calculations and all that stuff. So it's very, very intelligent. It's the smartest rental. I also recommend our news and educational articles. There's a lot of information in there. Not to mention we have a new landlord guide, which is 8 very short chapters. I mean, each chapter is probably 2 pages long. But it's super easy to read, and it's a perfect starting place for novice landlords.
That's awesome. Well, and I think that's awesome with the calculator because that just goes to show again how important running the numbers are whenever you're getting into this field. I mean, I truly believe one of the most important things is being able to have some sort of resource on hand that you can pull up at any moment in time when you find a property that you're interested in for you to be able to run the numbers quickly to see if it's even something that's worth pursuing.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, real estate rental properties are an investment, and any investment in return is going to be. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it does come down to the math, like in any investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great, and I encourage everyone out there listening, if you haven't been to EZLandlord Forms, go check it out. I mean, like Brian said, there's a plethora of resources there, forms, these awesome things that they're launching. I definitely recommend going and checking it out because there really is a lot of great information for, whether you're just starting off or whether you're somebody that's been investing or further down in your career. If you haven't been there, I really recommend going and checking it out. I want to talk a little bit now about your own investing. I got your take on some things. We've talked a little bit about the website. I mean, you also are a real estate investor. So I want to just talk about how'd you get started?
Well, my first job out of college, we alluded to it earlier with the the guy who ran the
right.
the mortgage company. So yeah, it was with a nationwide mortgage lending company. It was a subprime mortgage lending company that a few years later everyone was running around and condemning.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so I worked with the 2 owners of the company, and I started specializing in hardly investment rehab loans. So it was a lot of investors who would buy properties in Baltimore City in particular was where I was living and working, and they would buy them as shells and they would renovate them and either keep them as rental properties or turn around and sell them. So I got interested in buying these properties myself, getting into the game, and of course my timing was absolutely terrible. It's just right in the middle of the bubble.
Of course, right?
Right. So I ended up buying too many properties too fast for too much money, and causing a giant headache for myself. Some of those properties I'm still stuck with.
Man.
Yeah, but it's kind of like any investment portfolio. You're going to have some rotten apples, and then you're going to have some real superstars that do well for you. So I've got some properties that do well by me, and then I've got others that I curse every month and I wish that I could sell, but I'm upside down on them, and so that's how I got started in it. I currently own 15 rental properties.
Awesome.
And there is some work involved in managing them, and it is a little bit of a not a juggling act, but it's on top of working full time with EZLandlord Forms. So it's some work. I do have a property manager take care of some of the properties for me, and I manage some of the others. Most of my properties are in working class neighborhoods. I really think that there's a sweet spot of stable, old, blue collar neighborhoods that do have a stable industry providing a source of jobs and a strong sense of community. If you go too high end or even too middle end, people are going to be buying their own homes, and then you're competing with homeowners. So I like to think of it as buying retail versus buying wholesale. If you buy in a neighborhood which is mostly not homeowners, then you're buying wholesale. You're competing with other investors as opposed to competing with homeowners.
Right.
And it's hard to get that sweet spot exactly right. It changes from city to city and market to market.
Right.
But that's where I think the real sweet spot is for rental investing.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you there. We, my husband and I have, it's been a crazy couple months. We were living in like Northern Virginia area. We've recently moved to Pennsylvania, but most of our properties are in Virginia, and we've found kind of a sweet spot there. And it's just like you're describing where your properties are. I mean, I feel like it's just, we want to now expand to now where we're living, but I can't seem to leave that place because I just feel like there's such opportunity, and it's been so great to invest there that, it's like, why leave when it's been so great?
Well, Northern Virginia is not too far, hopefully, from where you are in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's not very far, so that's beneficial. But that's awesome. So what made you choose rental properties over any of the other kind of real estate investing, flips and wholesaling and all the other avenues you can go?
Well, I love the idea of passive income. And I realize the irony that we've talked a lot about how much work it is to manage real estate. But rental properties are really a game changer if you look at the math for your retirement portfolio or your retirement timeline and how much money you need in order to retire. Rental properties can dramatically slash the total amount of cash that you need to have invested. And some of that is from leverage, getting mortgages, but most of that is just from the high return that you can get from it and the fact that it's all passive income. Mm-hmm. So that's really what has enchanted me about rental property investing is the idea of retiring at 40 or
right, exactly.
living on a beach somewhere.
Right.
So that's a long way away. Not 40, but retirement. So yeah, I mean, I really we have an article on our website about the math of retirement and how rental properties change it, which I think is fascinating for anyone who is as obsessed with passive income as I am. I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. I will. I'll include that in the show notes. That way, people can get right to it and check it out. That would be great. I agree. I think that's something that's important, and that's actually, now that I think about it, probably one of the reasons why my husband got us started in this, because he is a finance guy, went to school for finance, so that's all. Numbers were all his thing until a couple of years ago when he got me involved in this, and now maybe I've stolen some of that from him. But a lot of it had to do with the retirement and, like you said, retiring and living on a beach someday, somewhere, who knows. But you have a background in finance. And so how, with your properties, I mean, have you done conventional financing? Have you gone more the creative route? I mean, which road have you gone down for the properties that you own?
I've done it all. I've done hard money loans. I've done conventional financing. I will say this, in today's credit world, it's a lot harder to borrow money for rental properties if you have more than just a couple of them.
Yes.
Most banks will not finance you more conventionally. I actually just bought a house in August that I financed mostly through my credit card.
Really?
Yeah, and cash and just a mix of things. But I'm trying to get away from borrowing money because I don't like the expense of hard money, and I don't like the difficulty in conventional financing. And because I own more than 10 properties, most banks just won't touch me.
I was just going to say, with 15, I'm sure that's tough, because I know after 4 it gets tough, but then even after 10 it gets even tougher. So I'm sure that's probably an avenue that's slowly, if not surely, creeping away for you.
It is. Now, I mean, there are other things you can do to raise money. People get creative and like crowdsource it, through crowdfunding websites. And I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. You can borrow money from friends and family. I've got a friend who's an investor and a property manager, and he has a rather large investment fund that he's put together all from friends and family members who just give him money, and he just rotates it through properties. He'll buy them and fix them up and sell them, or he'll keep some as rental properties. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do once you break away from that mold of all I have is the bank, and you can get creative with it, and there's a lot out there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think at the same time, it's a little scary to go that route too. I mean, maybe borrowing money for people is a scary thing with thinking, conventional financing from the bank, but then trying to come up with a creative way, that can also be intimidating, I think, for a lot of people too.
It certainly can. And like I said, I'm trying to keep all of my future investments cash only.
Right.
So, we'll see.
Well, props to you for coming up with the credit card thing. That's cool.
Well, that was I actually wasn't supposed to draw on the credit card at all, but the project went a little over budget and took a little longer than I thought, so I ended up just not paying my credit card bill for a few months, and charging all my expenses to the credit card, and that way I was able to avoid paying the 4 points that the credit card charges for, and the astronomical interest they charge if you actually pull cash out.
Right.
So I didn't actually pull any cash out, but I just have been putting all my expenses on the credit card and not really paying it for a couple months.
Right.
But which in itself has its own risks. So.
Well, that's awesome. So you have 15. I mean, kind of as we're winding down here, I mean, what are your goals for your future and your properties?
Well, the next goal that I have is I want to start paying down some of the mortgages that I have. So I'm going to go through mortgage by mortgage and pay each one off individually, so that you end up with a snowball effect of, I'm just going to make up numbers for a second here. If I have $500 worth of passive income from my properties now, then, maybe by the end of the next 18 months, when I pay off the next mortgage, maybe I'll have a grand in passive income from the rental properties. And then you can pay off the next mortgage even faster. So maybe at that time it only takes another year to pay off the next mortgage, and then you're at $1,500 a month passive income.
Right.
So you end up with this kind of upward spiral of paying down your debts faster and creating more and more passive income. And at a certain point, you no longer are forced to work every day.
Right.
You don't have to have a 9-to-5 job. Now you will probably choose to keep working in some capacity.
Right.
Maybe you love your job. I love my job.
Right.
But working becomes something you do for fun, for engagement. It's something that you do as an intellectual exercise and as a challenge. Something you do out of love, and no longer because you need to put food on your family's table.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people who get involved with rental property, I really do think deep down that's one of if they're going to stick with it and they're going to make a serious run at it, I think that's probably what a lot of the goals are for a lot of people that get into this, because it's tangible. It's something that you can do if you decide to go down this road.
Absolutely. And, as we were talking about, there's nothing better than the idea of passive income.
Right. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I want to close out here and just ask, as somebody who, you live and breathe this world, do you have any advice for rookie investors?
The most important piece of advice that I would give a rookie investor is don't get undercapitalized. You don't want to be in a situation where you don't have enough money to pay your mortgage of your rental properties plus all your other bills. I was jokingly talking about how I relied on my credit card for the last property, but the fact is I do have plenty of other assets and income producing investments. So I chose to go the credit card route, but I could have gone any number of other ways, dividends from my stock portfolio or any number of other places. And of course I have a W-2 work income. Right. I work full time. But don't get undercapitalized. That's probably the first and most important thing that people get wrong when they first get into buying real estate is they stretch themselves too thin. They don't have enough money in the bank. And then a catastrophe happens, such as the tenant stops paying the rent, the furnace goes out, you need a new roof that's going to cost $4,000. And then the investor, the landlord, freaks out because they don't have the money. Mm-hmm. And that's a bill that can't wait. You need to put the new roof on the property if it caves in. Yep. If the furnace goes out in January, you got to fix that furnace today. There's no postponing these expenses. And likewise, you have to pay your mortgage regardless of whether your tenant pays you. So keep a thick cash cushion when you are real estate investing, because things will go wrong sooner or later. They always do. So you need to have the money to handle it when they do.
Yeah, and I know that's great advice. When you're out there running those numbers, my husband, I call him the worst case scenario man, because that's always that's him. What if? But it's, as much as I pick on him about it, I think it's valid. Like you're saying, you've got to be ready for those sorts of things when they're going to happen.
Yeah, I bet that those doomsday scenarios that he's come up with, I bet there have been some times when it has saved you guys, because you've had the money there when bad news came up.
Yep, absolutely. So, well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming again, Brian. This was awesome for you. You've shared a ton of insight. Like I said earlier, if you haven't gone to EZLandlord Forms, check it out. There's tons of stuff on there. I'll be putting links to the website, to some of the articles, to the rental property calculator you were talking about. All that stuff will be on the show notes, so everybody can access that quick and easy. But thank you so much for coming and sharing all your insight.
Emily, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome.
So that about wraps up our show today. Thanks everybody for tuning in to the Rental Rookie Podcast show for today with Brian Davis. Like I mentioned earlier, head on to the show notes. There are lots of links to a lot of the articles that Brian and I discussed in today's podcast, along with the link to access the 15% off at EZLandlord Forms. If you're interested in that, make sure that you go through that specific link, all right, that's been created to enable you to get that 15% off. So until next podcast, happy investing.
Thanks for listening to the Rental Rookie Podcast. We love helping people invest in rental properties, so feel free to spread the word about our podcast. Rate us on iTunes, leave us a comment, or share us with your network. Learn more at rentalrookie.com.